Well, hello, my friends. So on this tutorial, we're going to take a look at some different module patterns. Okay, so in the last lesson, we learned about the module in Node.js. We created a helper module in here, and we created a function inside of it. So then we exported this function to make it accessible outside of the module. Then we required that module so that we can use that function, well, basically anywhere we want. Then finally, we stored that in this variable right here and called it. So what if we want to return a variety of things from this module? What if this module was not returning just this helper function, but returned different functions? What? We can do that? Well, I hope so, because I'm going to rename this helper function, and its name will be user, because it's telling us the authenticated user. Now I'm going to add different helper functions in this module as well. So let's create some different functions. Okay, so I'm going to create another variable, and I'm going to name it ID. So I'm going to say let ID is equal to function. And then this function is going to get an argument, and the argument is going to be an ID, just like that. And then what we're going to do is return a string, which is just going to return this user ID. All right, so basically this helper function is going to tell us the user ID. So let's return ID in here like so. Okay, so now we have a second function in this module that I want to export. And I want to add one more function in here just to make sure that I get everything I need. So I'm going to say let email and set this equal to function. And then this function is going to get an email argument just like that. Then this will return an email. Okay, so now how do you suppose we can export these three different things in here? So when we require this module, we're going to want all of these three things to be accessible. Do you see a way? Let's have a look. So in here, we said module export equals helper. We set it to equal this variable. So module export is just an empty object. So we could add on properties to this object. We could say module export user equals to user, like that. So now the user property of this exports object is equal to this function. And therefore we can add, what do you say? All the properties which are equal to different functions in this module, right? So let's duplicate this line. And one more time. And now I'll just change this to ID and set this ID equal to be ID. And then this will be the email, like so. Now we're exporting ID, user, and email as these functions on different properties of this exports object. So that means that all of these are going to be available outside of the module where we require this module, right? All right, so let's save all this. Go to app.js. Now we're storing all the objects in this helper variable. So this helper variable has three properties in it. So now instead of saying helper in here, we should say helper.user. And remember, helper is a module, and it returns to us an object, which has these three properties. So therefore, we're calling this function by saying helper.user. Okay, so let's save it and run the file. So I'm going to say node app, like so. Okay, so now we see that text again. Alex is logged in. That's cool, right? So let's try calling some other functions right here. So I'm going to say console log helper.id. And for the ID, let's say 123, like so. And then for the last one, let's say console log helper.email. Then the email would be alex@mail.co, something like that. Okay, so I think we're ready. Let's console log out that function. And now I'm going to say node app. And look at that. See, we can see all the other functions. We can see that Alex is logged in. The ID is 123 and email is alex@mail.co. All right. So now we've exported multiple things from this module. And that, my friends, is powerful. All right. So now we have 3 exports in here, and it, well, doesn't seem as, I don't know, let's call it efficient as it could be. So do you suppose there's another way? Of course there's another way. So we've referenced these variables up in here and given them all as a property to this module object. But we could do it like this. So I'll just delete these module exports here. And I'm going to say module.exports again. And this time, this will be an object. And then I'm going to add all these things to this object. So I'm going to say user, and that'll be the user, like so. If key and value pairs are the same, we can shorten this by removing one of the pairs in here. So it's a kind of a shortcut, which came with ES6. So then I'm going to add ID and then the email. Okay, so now we're still exporting all these different functions on module exports, but this time we've cut out a bit of the code. So why don't we save all that and make sure it still works? So in here, I'm going to say node app to run the app file. All right, see, everything still works perfectly, and we've abbreviated our code. We get these 3 things logged down in here to the terminal. We're still adding these properties onto module.exports, but we're just doing it in literal notation. That's cool. So we can export modules within a few different patterns and make them available to other files when we require those modules. So let's go ahead and take a short break here and come back to the next lesson. I'll see you then.